Thank you. Um, so those who registered for this can get this recording later. Um, he has generously provided us his email address if you have questions that you want to follow up with him on after this presentation. He does have a forthcoming book with Barclay Press. It is called The Gospel in the Anthropocene, Letters from a Quaker Naturalist. It is not available for pre-order yet, but it is forthcoming, and you can write to him and also find out more about his upcoming book on his blog, which is in the message. At this point, oh, and I do want to say a word about how this evening is structured. We will go into waiting worship, and from the silence, Brian will share the message he has prepared for us this evening. Um, and then he will invite us to share reflections and questions in the chat. So we will not be calling on individual friends to speak because there are just so many of us this evening. And I will be keeping an eye on the chat and conveying certain questions and messages to Brian. It's likely that not all questions and messages will be read during this meeting just because there are so many of us. But again, if you have anything you need to say to Brian after this, he has provided his email address. Um, so with that, I will invite us into the silence, and when Brian feels called to speak, he will share with us.
Wendy sort of startled me with the reference to generational impacts. It made me think of a line from Psalm 71 that's become my motto, I think, which is, "Now when I am old and gray-headed, O God, forsake me not, until I have showed thy strength unto this generation, and thy power to every one that is to come." It's a It's a hope. The topic of the traveling ministry from a historical perspective is so large, even larger than this crowd, um, that what I'm hoping to do tonight is to say some things that may interest you and pique your interest for further explorations on your own. Um, there's still a lot of history to be written about it. So if anybody is a scholar looking for a topic, I have some suggestions. Um, but it's not an academic subject. It's really deeply embedded with much of what Quakerism is about, because um, the traveling ministry in its myriad forms is one of the most commonplace and yet the most fascinating examples of God at work among us actively. So I hope by the end of this conversation, um, uh, the picture that will be conveyed is of a phenomenon which is extremely precious and accessible to anybody in some form or other. And the more that friends are aware of a leading to undertake some kind of intervisitation or travel in the ministry, and we can talk about whether there's a difference between those two, the more healthy our society is going to be. I can't help but start with a couple of comments about the dilemma of Quakerism, which traveling ministry responds to. So, Quakerism, as I understand it, when it's a living experience, is, as Rufus Jones said, a movement, not a sect. It's a fellowship. It arose as a fellowship of people who were convinced and convicted and became committed to the developing path that Quakerism articulated. Because it is a movement that is renewed by people uh, intentionally joining themselves or allowing themselves to be joined to it. Even if you were raised a friend, you have at some point to make a commitment to really be a friend. But of course, a lot of us are convinced, as I was, friends. And um, so the maintenance of some kind of integrity or coherence, a living unity amidst all of our variety, requires um, a continual re-engagement by all of us. It's part of what we're committed to the power or the way or the voice by which we have been gathered together. There is a danger always of focusing so much on the inward that our religious experience is completely subjective and personal and um, private. The work of the Spirit overcomes that to some degree, but um, it's good to celebrate the fact that we're creatures. Um, the Creator works through and infuses the creation. And so physical means are a central element um, of, of our spiritual enactments. So physical means like physical presence or whatever it is that we're doing right now. Um, shared practices, and the many uses of words, both to describe what we're going through, our individual experience, and to try to articulate the truth that embraces us all. How we are connected to the centuries long story of a God who calls and people who respond. So that's true for individuals and their community, but meetings can be too individual as well, can be too isolated, too subjective. And so, just as an individual um, is enriched and sort of calibrated to the truth, um, our individual reality balanced by the reality of our community. So, meetings, experience, and testimony are enriched and calibrated by interaction with other meetings. And the way that meetings interact most often is by an individual who is in themselves a message of love. So, an early quarterly meeting testified that it's a living ministry that gathers a living people, begets a living people. And certainly, itinerant ministry in the first couple of generations of Friends was the way Friends became the movement that they developed into. Apostles traveling around the country um, tirelessly looking for the tender-hearted and inviting them to turn inward to the light, which would paradoxically draw them into this community. But even after we had settled meetings and after people stopped persecuting us most of the time, and um, the the sense of apocalyptic urgency sort of faded away, and we became a bit more like a denomination or a sect. Um, Friends have always felt the calling to stir about, to move from place to place. Um, Often experiencing something very much like curiosity, wanting to know how the other branches of the family are doing. What's it like? The next meeting over, the next quarterly meeting over, the next year to meeting over. It's sometimes useful to count things, and people have counted, the number of friends that were likely to have traveled transatlantically in ministry um, during the 1700s. And sometimes people take a number like, so there might be several hundred of such people who traveled with a minute. Um, Maybe 70 or 80 or 90 or 100 every year circulating around the transatlantic Quaker world. The problem with that is that, as as I'll come back to later, um, most of the records that people consult for such estimates of activity way undercount them because they're looking for people who are doing lots of travel, who are, whose travel requires a lot of discernment by successive levels of the meeting organization, and so um, they tend not to include such counts tend not to include all the people who are moving locally, who maybe never visited outside their own yearly meeting. And yet there was a constant trickle. So the circulation is not a few people circulating all through the body, but lots of local and regional and national or continental and intercontinental travel, um, sometimes performed by a few prominent visitors, but mostly by lots and lots of people uh, just moving about in their neighborhood, and sometimes even house to house. So when we talk a little later about the variety of the ministry that uh, has been characteristic of uh, this travel. Um, you'll see why it is that the numbers must have been staggering, and why, if you look around at the practice that we see in our own yearly meetings now, it feels somewhat impoverished. And when you start connecting those together, you start feeling like, oh, if we allowed ourselves to experience this kind of leading, this kind of concern in some, it might unlock stuff that we can't really imagine. Um, when there's been an active ministry and that always has meant an active traveling ministry, that's when friends have been most vital. It is, in a really important way, a critical path of spiritual formation in the Quaker life. Um, so maybe I want to expand a little bit on that sense of variety and abundance. Um, so I once spent some time looking through the Annual Monitor, which was a publication during especially the 1800s, of um, notices of deceased ministers and other notable friends. They were published in New York Yearly Meeting, and in Philadelphia Yearly Meeting and other places. And there's just, every year there's a few dozen. Uh, Sometimes they're formal minutes, sometimes they're reminiscences. So I found my little file box just for you. And I um, I grabbed um, three people at random and one person not at random, whom you'll recognize, um, to give you a sense of the variety of what was going on. So there's John Meter, who died around 1860. Um, he was a minister from Providence, Rhode Island. And he's got minutes to many yearly meetings. He got a travel minute because he felt led to visit the Indians west of Mississippi. He went to England and the continent. Um, he was one of those people who was likely to show up at any more in most practically. He was widely traveled. Right next to him in my list is Deborah Moline, who died in 1842. She first appeared in the ministry, it says, with a few sentences. She was later acknowledged as a minister. Um, and it says her services were chiefly confined within the limits of her own quarterly meeting. Um, Once she traveled to the eastern counties of her yearly meeting, which is not noted here. Um, Her communications in the line of ministry were not frequent and generally short, but she was a bright example in her care not to exceed the measure of her gift. This is the sort of friend that our meetings are full of. Deborah Moley. Elizabeth Knock, here's my other random friend, who died. She was from London Yearly Meeting. She died in 1843. She was convinced a friend at age 22, along with her father. Came forth in the ministry about 15 years later. She several times visited meetings and families within her own quarterly meeting. That's their testimony of ministerial activity. She was noted for entertaining discouraging views of herself, and she was often closely tried. So she clearly was an important presence within her quarterly meeting and active there. And that was her scope. And when people make, counts of traveling ministers, they don't count people like Deborah Moline and Elizabeth Knock. Here's here's the person that I did not choose at random, which is Elias Hicks. So we think of Elias Hicks as one of the great travelers, logging an awful lot of miles in his very long life. It turned out that he had 60 minutes for service. Well, a little bit more than 60. Um, five of them, so he was from Long Island, right? So five of those minutes were specifically for family visitations on Long Island within his meeting mostly. 29 of them were for within travel within New York yearly meeting. 7 were for immediately adjacent meetings around New York City. Um, 1 was to the schools at the yearly meeting. 1 was to the schools on Long Island. 2 were to new meetings in the yearly meeting. And 1 was to Indians on Long Island, presume the Shinnecock. Um, most of his travel was 15, most of his travel was for 1 month or less. So considering you're traveling by horse or boat, um, you're not going a great distance within a month. Some of his travel extended 13 weeks, and a few of them longer than that, more than 6 months. Of all of his minutes, 17 were approved by the yearly meeting, so for travel outside the yearly meeting, 6 by his quarterly meeting, but 41 by his monthly meeting alone. So there's one of the most local friends. Most of his work was local. The travel under was I think sometimes we think of the public ministry as people having a concern and traveling under that concern, and like John Woolman going around and talking about slavery, or Anthony Benezet, or Lucretia Mott talking about slavery or women's rights or something like that. But I would say that most of the time that's not how it has worked. Most of these friends were traveling under the motions of love. And so what they were was motivated by love, and they were personalities, each of them with their own preparation and their own interests and I suppose preoccupations and leanings as well. Um, so I think it's important to bear in mind as you think about travel that you might be led to undergo, or travel that others might be feeling led to do, to start with the very basics. And so I'm going to remind you of, probably can all recite from memory, but whenever I open a new travel journal, I write it in the front. So you could cast your mind back. There's John Woolman in his tent. It's raining. He's going out to visit the Indians in the far frontier of Pennsylvania. And he wonders what was going on. Why was he doing this? And he says, love was the first emotion. And then a concern arose to spend some time with the Indians, that I might feel and understand their life and the spirit they live in, if haply I might receive some instruction from them, or they might be in any degree helped forward by my following the leadings of truth among them. There's an extraordinary purity in that. I think real ministry has to be, no matter what form it takes, whether it's teaching or preaching or praying or silence or accompaniment of some other kind, the minister has to wait until they feel where their concern touches that love. You can be motivated to move about because you feel like people need to know things, or you need to know things. There's nothing wrong with that. Or the people need to be corrected, or people need to be organized into some movement or something. But um, if you don't have love, then it's all, you know, uh, it can be all superficial. It can be uh, diverted. It can be idolatrous. It can be much in the self-will, and it won't necessarily open in the hearts of the people you are led to, the witness that you want to collaborate with and whose life is what you're calling people to really engage with most deeply in ways that are given to you to say. So traveling with a particular concern always has to be, and I think friends traditionally have understood this, uh, always has to be hold the particular concern you're traveling with lightly. If you say that you want to travel under a peace concern or a racial relations concern or some other concern, that may be what is burning with you and you're looking forward to engaging friends around. But in the moment with the people there, it's completely fresh. It's a new creation every time. Friends who have kept to that sense of love as the first motion will therefore be led into a lot of different forms of visitation. Some friends are gifted at visiting, uh, you know, making presentations to large groups. Some friends are gifted at visiting meeting on Sunday morning and speaking in worship. Some friends have had in the years, in years, over the years, uh, a gift in private worship, private opportunities, in families, with individuals, in small groups, intimate and um, completely challenging because you can't, when you're sitting there and you say, I've come to visit you out of a sense of love, I felt led to come sit with you. You have to be honest and really give over the experience to the spirit of love, to Christ at work between you. What is it that's going to be made out of this opportunity together? Because it is this kind of direct encounter where it's not just um, myself, the visitor, and you, the visited, involved, but also God at work within us if we're faithfully present to the situation. This is why it's such a powerful kind of spiritual formation, because you have to do a lot of work to really be present, as you all know. You have to winnow out a lot of motives, a lot of hopes, a lot of anxieties, a lot of shyness, a lot of presumption, um, so that you really are um, freshly available, completely available. And when you're traveling in the ministry, it's often there's often been a gift given to you of focus. You've done a certain preparation, you've gotten some guidance from your friends, you've gotten some discernment, you've overcome many, if not all, of your fears. You're present there and everything, and you suddenly understand how it can feel to be that free in the spirit. And then you go back to your life, and uh, one thing leads to another, and you sort of lose that sense of focus. But once you've experienced it, you know what it is you're missing. And in that encounter, you've also heard something or felt something from the other person, the other people that you encounter, of their experience, their diverse experience of the one whose life we share and whose unity we are enacting when we're most open in love. Travel in the ministry has been a critical element for Friends traditionally, therefore in pastoral care as well. So there's been there are overseers and there are elders and there are pastoral care groups and everything. But if somebody feels like, in addition to all of that, I want to visit in families, I want to sit with you because I'm drawn to sit with you, that introduces a sort of a wildcat element. Um, it's a visitation from the spirit on top of all of our routines and our scheduling and our good practices. It's not it's that it is a plus factor in the Quaker practice, which uh, many other communities don't have, and many of our communities don't have now. Actually, many of our Quaker meetings don't have it now because um, we don't feel free to do it. It's sort of presumptuous, to say to your meeting, you know what, I feel like I'd like to visit the families in this meeting. Um, I've done this a few times, and the meetings have been generally kind to me. And having discerned that I have an actual leading to do that, have allowed me to go forward. And the response is sort of a puzzled welcome. Friends are glad to have you come. They don't know what to expect. Um, and they don't realize that we're all making this up as we go along because it's the spirit at work in us. Something's been broken open, and there's not a formula for this. This is complete, fresh, direct encounter. And it needn't happen very often for us to realize that you never can tell when you're going to be seized by something small and yet miraculous. Because there's all these different varieties of encounter, um, I find it harder and harder to draw a strong distinction between intervisitation and travel in the ministry. So at one extreme, you can say, well, at one end of the continuum, um, it's a good thing for anybody in a meeting to say, you know what, I can't just always worship in my meeting, even though that's where the gravitational pull is. I should at least visit, I wonder what that other meeting in my quarterly meeting is like. Or I know somebody because I'm on a committee with them and I want to go worship with them for a change. That doesn't feel like travel in the ministry, and yet it is a gift. Um, it it reminds us that we are larger than the little circles we tend to travel in. Our community is richer than we tend to see, and that's a gift. We've got a very lively family scattered about the countryside. It feels to me like the more that kind of, shall we call it, friendly visitation takes place, the more likely it is that more friends are going to feel an actual concern. The penny drops. There's a sense of opening and of responsibility. A leading arises to go to a particular place or a particular person or a particular community. Um, uh, Traveling in gospel love with possibly other concerns on your heart. Um, so this is why it's the many motivations for visiting other meetings seem to me to be breeding grounds, mulch for the growth of uh, travel in what we would call a public ministry. When one starts to feel that the Spirit is laying a duty on us to go visit something, someplace, somebody, undertake a calling of any kind, um, then it becomes a community concern, as we all know. I tend to think that we have come to overemphasize community discernment over individual discernment, but they are two sides of the same coin. Um, But I think it might be good for us to explore the tension between an emergent prophetic calling, however gentle and loving, and the community tendency to counterbalance, to limit, to make things go slow, so forth. We need people in an extravagance of love to feel led to try something that's new to them and maybe new to their community. The community needs to hold that in wisdom and love, recognizing that um, the experience of a true motion of the spirit is extraordinarily precious. There's nothing more important in our testimony to the world, in our experience individually and as communities. It's something that the community um, should delight in and welcome, should cherish and feel that they're as intensely engaged with it as the friend to whom the concern has come. And we should be welcoming uh, friends who have been moved to travel, um, offering them opportunity to exercise the gift that's been given them, and recognize that they're bringing to us, again, a gift of freedom as well as love. More than one person who's traveled uh, in the past few decades that I've talked with has talked about how they've been led to a concern, they've discerned it with their meeting, and then they feel discouraged about traveling because nobody seems to want them to come. And I'm paraphrasing here, but it's a story I've heard many times. Somebody feels led to visit meetings, perhaps motivated by a particular concern, and or even just traveling, as I have done with a minute basically in gospel love. And meetings respond with a sort of a, well, I'm not sure it's going to fit our schedule for this month. Um, Thanks for letting us know that you've got this concern. And if we have an opportunity, we'll think about bringing it into, opening up an opportunity in a forum for you or something like that. Um, Rather than saying, huh, the spirit is moving in this person. Let's stop what we're doing because this is something fresh. We don't have to fit this into our schedule. This maybe is the schedule. Maybe this is the gift that we need. Um, that response and eagerness to um, to receive a gift uh, whose dimensions we don't know, whose import we don't know, is a gift both to the meeting and to the friend acting under concern, because they're still testing and understanding the strength and the content of their gift, the gift that they are husbanding at this point. And so um, part of being a prophetic people in these times when prophecy is so important, although in what times is prophecy not important? Part of being a prophetic people is being welcoming and respectful to prophets, and helping and recognizing that may be learning their trade. Um, they may be prophets in formation. Um, they may be seeking in the course of their gift may be the way that they are seeking. It's the way that they are being formed. And the meeting's willingness to see what the gift is embedded in it for the meeting is in turn helping to shape the minister at that moment. So to honor the gift of leading and to support the spiritual formation of the person who's being um, who's being led, giving them guidance and restraint and encouragement. Maybe I'll stop there. I've been talking more than I intended to, and we should just take some questions.
Thank you, Brian. Um, for those that entered while Brian was speaking, I will introduce again the way that we are making comments and asking questions. Um, if you are able, please write your comments and or questions in the chat, and I will be monitoring that and relaying those as I am able. And as we have time to Brian, please feel free to begin writing into the chat now, if you feel called to do that. I won't begin reading questions or comments for a few minutes, and I'd like to invite us into some worship while we consider the message that Brian brought to us today.
I think I'd like to add one more thing. Um, I've come to feel, I've said this to some of you, I recognize some faces on the screen. I've come to feel like modern friends are in some way, liberal friends at least, maybe all of them, um, are in a condition that's sort of like the first friends. We're reinventing ourselves. Um, Many of our structures and our old certainties and so forth have fallen away, sometimes under the torrential winds of modernity or postmodernity, and sometimes with whatever's going on with religiosity in our societies. Um, but the spirit keeps moving; it keeps rising among us, and so um, the forms and the work of the ministry are emerging again in people in often untraditional ways. And the process of discovering what it means to be a friend and to be a minister in that context, we're relying hugely on the guidance of the Spirit, and we have to be negotiating even what Spirit we're listening to. And I take some comfort, have taken some comfort from the realization that Quaker ministry has always been an apprenticeship model. Um, you're under guidance from the Spirit, but you got to try things. You try to enact what's given to you to do and no more. Um, and you're surrounded by people, or you encounter people from time to time who are undergoing the same apprenticeship under the same master, um, with different kinds of preparations and different kinds of experiences. And so it's really important for friends who have some experience in the ministry to talk with others who have had that experience, um, to compare notes and to tenderly listen to each other's stories, um, because um, we're working with complex material, spirit and flesh, in communities, um, and in our times, in our culture, and we're all being led, we hope, by the same spirit, and the advice, the consolation, the accompaniment, the watchfulness and prayer over each other is tremendously valuable, and the sense of ministering friends as a community is really important to the maintenance of a lively ministry in all its variety amongst us.
So Brian, we have a lot of questions, and they're your questions. They're not my questions. So I'm just going to read them to you. Um, I feel called to share this question. To what extent do you see self-consciousness or concern about being viewed as self-important as factors that need to be overcome? What has been your experience with these?
Oy, oops. Um, my electricity just flickered. I'm not sure what that's about. So if I disappear, it's because we lost power. um, well, there went the power. Can you hear me? Okay. Um, there are a lot of things to be afraid of when you start moving in public ministry. You're afraid that you're going to do the wrong thing. You're afraid that you're overstepping the mark. You're afraid that people are going to judge you. You're afraid that you're not going to measure up. Um, and all I can say is that you've got to be willing. So I felt those fears, many of those fears. Um, and it's certainly the case that people um, will sometimes be irritated when somebody steps forward and says they feel like they've got a leading to some kind of public role. Um, that debate goes on in every yearly meeting in a lot of different accents. Um, I have to say that my refuge in that situation is um, uh, to fall back on a trust that no, I'll put it a different way. The wisdom of God looks like foolishness to people sometimes, and if you're rooted in God's love, it's going to look foolish to some people. You got to be willing to look like a fool, and and just accept that. If you're rooted the best you can, the best you can be in your sense that you're acting in and under the guidance of the love of God towards the people you're sent to. Um, that's that's all that's given to you to do. You can't if you're speaking out of that love and power, that's really the message anyway. And so you got to be willing to be you got to be willing to look like a fool. Sometimes you will be a fool. Sometimes you'll make a mistake, um, but or outrun your guide. Or and my favorite journals tell those stories about how in the youth of their ministry they went too far or they didn't go far enough and were rebuked for it. Um, so it is whoever asked the question put their finger on a constant dilemma. Just goes with the territory.
Thank you, Brian. We are holding you in the light as you sit in the dark.
So far, I
Um,
haven't lost internet, so that's good.
you've got some light reflecting off your glasses. It's a good effect. We have several variations of this question. Can you speak more about callings to travel beyond Quaker communities?
Well, that's that's a pretty general question. Um, there've always been friends who've been. I'll just open this up and then hope that somebody will ask the next layer of the question. In every generation, there have been friends who've been led to and sometimes had a particular gift for speaking to non-friends. You'll see in some memorial minutes a note that a particular friend rarely spoke in their own meeting, but often were led to speak to the freedmen or to the Native Americans or to, you know, um, to travel and visit other religious communities than the Quakers. Um, Paul says that we should pray earnestly for the to receive the best gifts. And if a friend feels like they've got a concern that there's something that's drawing them in that direction, they should keep their eye on it and and move forward with it as way opens. Again, you can't go wrong with Woolman's advice that you're going to go and feel the life, the spirit in which they live, learn something about their life, in case you might be instructed by being there or possibly them helped forward by your following the promptings of truth. Um,
Um, so I'm trying to condense this question. Um, I so there's a question about the power of recorded ministry. Um, and I'm wondering if you can talk about recording um, and how how the process of recording um, serves to advance or distract from ministry calls. Does that make sense?
oh, yes.
Okay, take it.
Um, my first response is that it's important, as soon as ask a question like this, to set aside the machinery that we're talking about and think about functionalities. So um, it's really important in every community that all the different kinds of gifts be, if they're going to be, especially for public service, public ministry of any kind, be um, first of all noticed by the person in whom they're rising, but also then affirmed and um, shaped, uh, formed within the community, so that the gift, if it really is of some emotion of the spirit, it's of divine origin, is being held appropriately so that it bears the fruit that it can bear. So friends traditionally made note of people who had a sustained gift in public gospel ministry. Um, that is in preaching and teaching primarily. Um, in part because that gift required certain kinds of handling that maybe were not so important for other kinds of gifts. Um, so the question for me when people ask about recording is, what are you doing to recognize, to notice the gifts that are rising in the members? And what are you doing to give appropriate or helping find appropriate support for the gifts that are arising? Particular kinds of callings have particular challenges and temptations. You know, public ministry is legendary for its the um, the temptations to to self-importance uh, and to over eagerness and um, the temptations of pride and ego and other people's expectations, or um, all the different ways that people can fail when they feel like they're being watched, when they're being visible. Um, to take a public role and yet to stay rooted always in the fresh putting forth of the gift of the Spirit, and to see it always as a path of growth, of apprenticeship, um, that can take some particular kinds of forms for somebody whose calling is gospel ministry or public ministry of some kind. If the public ministry is more along the lines of, I don't know, um, nonprofit administration, um, or chaplaincy or something like that, the temptations, the challenges, the possible inhibitions, the kinds of learning that need to happen are going to be different for friends who are called to what uh, we used to call specifically the ministry, the vocal ministry, the gospel ministry. Um, Now, so having said all that, that's the most important thing: is how are these gifts being noticed and encouraged and formed and shaped and encouraged, pruned to bear fruit. The process of recording was the way that Friends did it for a long time for particular kinds of ministry. Um, it has real virtues. It has had also some real downsides. Um, and you can find lots of people who will tell you all the bad things that it's about, um, that are associated with it. Um, but um, an awful lot of meetings who set recording aside have not replaced it with a better system. Um, there was a friend, uh, T. Edmund Harvey, who wrote about the ministry in London Yearly Meeting 20 years after the ending of recording there. And the idea was that, wanted to make it very clear by ending the recording process in London Yearly Meeting that the ministry was something that everybody contributed to, which we always had thought. Friends have always thought that. They wanted to encourage wider participation in the ministry and so forth. Um, and his reflection was that the yearly meeting had pretty much failed to do that, failed to find new ways to do it. So the old system was moribund, so they threw out the old system, but they had not yet found a new system 20 years later, for the encouragement of ministry in a way that feels more appropriate to the way we are these days. Um, so I think it's a conundrum. I think that talking about recording is really difficult because people get pulled into disputes that are, to me, irrelevant to the main point. Um,
Thank you, Brian.
I'll stop there. One could go on with that for a long time.
Indeed. Who hasn't been in that particular fight? Um, we have probably 15 minutes for questions before we go into some worship at the end of our time together. Um, I am going to take two or three questions and combine them into one. Um, the role of disruption is a theme in the questions that are coming up. Um, there is curiosity about the positive impact of disruptive ministry, and how we might embrace that, uncomfortable disruption. And there is also a concern that perhaps we lift up disruptive ministry. So they feel sort of like equal concerns, but about different things. A tendency to feel that prophetic ministry is necessarily disruptive. Is that true? And can you speak to that? And can you also speak to a tendency to throw out disruptive ministry without engaging or laboring with it? You look so thrilled to get this question, Brian.
I'm just listening, because it's complex, and I'm trying to think about whether I have anything to say about it. Um, Part of the problem with this format for conversation is that um, it's hard to know what the friends asking the question mean by disruptive.
Oh, I can give you more context. Do you want more context?
Oh, sure.
In one of the questions, the friend very specifically cited Benjamin Lay, um, who we probably all know, but I will repeat, was a friend that was written out of meeting for his ministry around against slavery. He was very disruptive. And today, he is, someone that we identify with pretty universally as friends.
Yeah, Benjamin Lay's interesting. I mean, when people, it's been interesting to see him sort of come back into fashion, so to speak. Um, and what is the hunger that friends are feeling that Benjamin Lay is speaking to? Um, is it the sense of urgency? Is it the sense of uh, living with abandon in a concern? Is it a sense that um, we wish that somehow we could be freer or more faithful? Um, when somebody undertakes an extravagance, um, it just require. I don't think I can say anything more than anybody else here would say something like this, which is um, we have to always hold with the possibility that um, Christ is saying something to us um, in this person's words or deeds. But we have to try all things, try all the spirits that might be at work there, and focus on what's good and do discernment really means making a careful judgment, a considered judgment. And so I find it really hard to generalize it. You have to, it's hard work when something is unusual to feel and maybe shocking, or at least in a vocabulary that you're not used to, saying things you're not used to hearing. It's very hard to wait to feel where the words are coming from.
Um,
Yeah, I think that's
I,
all I can say about that.
sorry, Brian, I didn't wait for you to explicitly end.
Oh, it's
Just
okay.
charged ahead. Thank you. Um, so I want to ask you two more questions. Um, and we have someone, you had talked earlier about recording kind of not being the point. Um, and someone is asking if you have a specific suggestion as a substitute for recording. Do you have any additional thoughts about recording?
Oh, sure, I have additional thoughts. Um, First is that I have known people, including myself, for whom the traditional process has been nourishing and valuable, and I think helped me for sure, and I think others that I can think of be as serviceable as they can be. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing I want to say is that there are a lot of meetings around the country and probably around the world who are wrestling with this question, not the question of recording, but like what fills the vacuum that recording, the departure of recording has left. Um, and so there's a lot of experimentation going on. There are people, even within our own yearly meeting, there have been meetings that have wrestled with this question and come up with all kinds of minutes noting people's ministry um, in various ways, sometimes associated with, um, very often associated with some kind of support group or oversight group to help the person carry the calling for as long as they've got it. Um, and I would say a lot of those groups don't even bother with the naming of things exactly, but just to say, this friend has this concern or has this ministry that we want to extend our care to, and then the meeting figures out what they mean by that, and they enact that and learn about it. And So I think this is a time of it's a time of a lot of inventiveness, I think, and we should actually ask each other about what's going on within our yearly meetings or beyond. Like, how do you go about nurturing um, the gifts of ministry in your meeting? And I'm going to say one other thing. So I have, for a very long time now, it seems like generations apparently, I have been part of gatherings of ministering friends. And there, one wave of that was a time when I went around our yearly meeting, and in most of the quarters convened a gathering of friends who felt themselves to have a calling for gospel ministry. I let them choose. Um, and we gathered, and I really wanted the people from a particular region, to see each other, say, oh, I didn't know that was your calling, or maybe you did know, just to pull them together. And I sort of convened some worship and conversation and, potluck lunch or something. And then that bit of the community was visible, and to hear where their concerns were. And then I would go away and leave it. It's like those friends in the first generation who went on shore, kindled a fire, and left it burning, and went on with the next thing. Um, One of the fascinating things was that several of those groups that were roughly at the quarterly meeting level continued for some years. And I corresponded with them a little bit, and I listened, but I never went back to visit because it wasn't about me. So they were carrying on. They figured out what they wanted to do together. So that was great. But after a few years, first one and then another, it just so happened that I ended up visiting again. And invariably, the friends who had gathered first around a concern for gospel ministry, um, when when I visited a couple of years later, like 3 years later, um, almost nobody in that group would claim that that was their calling. The group had continued and so there's some there's something in us that that makes us nervous about encouraging public ministry in the sense of, like using words. Um, and I'm not sure why there's so much anxiety about it, because there's more talk about the public ministry now than there has been. Um, and we're willing to encourage all kinds of different service, and that's wonderful. But we tend not to actually encourage the vocal ministers amongst us. And I just think that's worth bearing in mind. And if your meeting finds a way to encourage gifts of ministry, uh, don't neglect those gifts. Don't take them for granted.
Thank you, Brian. Um, we only have time for one question, but I'm really torn between these two questions that I could be asking. So I'm going to try to do some kind of crazy patois of these two questions. So prepare yourself, Brian. Um, we have a question about the corporate naming of spiritual gifts by monthly meetings, um, which could be different from recording individuals as ministers. It could be similar in some way. Um, could you speak a little bit about what it might? I'm going to change this question a little bit. What would it mean to recognize the spiritual gifts of everyone in our meetings? Um, and um, and then I'm just going to follow that up with your opportunity to preach a little bit. We have a question sort of inviting you to recap what your vision for the Religious Society of Friends as a robust vocal ministry grows amongst friends and the general public. So, if you could just speak a little bit about what it would mean to recognize a variety of spiritual gifts inside of the meeting community and take your baseball bat and hit that ball out of the park by describing at 9:30 at night your vision for the Religious Society of Friends, Brian.
Um, well, jeepers. Um, in the time we have, it's hard to explore in much detail um, the, the what it means to recognize a variety of gifts. I mean, there are religious communities, not friends, but other religious communities that make a point of um, sort of systematically naming the gifts that are seen by the community in each member of the community, and then working with that being sort of something that the person receives and then works uh, with the community's encouragement for the coming year, let's say, and then there's a revisitation about it. So um, it's possible to for a meeting community to say, "We see this in you," and say that about every single person. The challenge is to do it in a way that's authentic um, and that's practical. So that the person feels like, okay, this is a thing I receive that feels in right ordering, and I want to work with it, and um, I need to um, render some account to my community from time to time about how it's going. The community should feel free to ask, and not in a spirit of judgment, but in a spirit of support and encouragement. Um, so the most important thing is that it's practical uh, and, in a sense, matter of fact. Um, you know, I fell into trying to be that way because the first meeting that I was responsible to, that it recognized my gift, we didn't know what to do. We didn't know what that meant, you know. And so I thought, okay, well, I'm going to tell you what I think my leading is, and then what I feel I'm led to do this coming year. And then a year later, I would say, well, this is what I thought, and this is how it seems now. This is what I did do. These are some other things that emerged. This is how that felt, and here's some other things that I see for this coming year. Um, and then give that to the meeting. And sometimes I felt like I was, making a paper airplane and tossing it into the void. And and yet sometimes, but the meeting knew that I was listening. And it meant that I had to try to be pretty down to earth about uh, what choices I was making for my time and effort. What was I reading? What was I learning? What was I praying about? Um, and also not to go on and on, so the meeting didn't have to read a little book every year. Um, and invite conversation, be in real conversation. So it feels like it's really important that meetings figure out something that's practical and simple, not pretentious, not too time consuming, something that can support continued revisitation. Um, yeah, my vision for the Society of Friends. Um, I think I'm going to dodge that one. Um, the Society of Friends has a lot of to go, a lot going for it. Um, we have to always go back to the spirit, and we have to be clear which spirit we're going back to. Um, and it feels like in every generation, friends have had certain struggles. Um, Sometimes it's been because they've been more inward than they should be in terms of their cultural engagement. But very often it's because the culture pulls us outward, and um, the things that we think of as being our virtues and our leadings and our principles and all of those things are really just an expression of the culture we're running in. Just like if you're a good middle class person, there are a certain number of sins that you just don't commit because it's just not, it's not done. But not because there's anything good about you, just because, you've got the right conventions to look conventionally good, right? You can't take credit for that. Um, and I think friends can be tempted to do that. Let's one of the blessings I think of being engaged not only with the world and with um, is to be engaged with Scripture and to be engaged also with the question, um, what do you make of the Gospels? What do you make of the Gospels? Um, it's something that's outside of our orbit. Uh, it's not 21st century. It's and yet there's great power there. And ideally, I mean, we're claiming that it's the same spirit that gave forth the scriptures also is giving forth is also making itself felt nowadays. So how do we understand that continuity? How do we wrestle with that? How do we, feel it in our present day and feel it in some sense of continuity? Because I don't know about you, but the God I worship is a God is one God, not a multiplicity of gods, no matter how many facets may reflect that God. And so the same God that was speaking in Jesus' time or in Moses' time or in the Buddha's time or in George Fox's time is speaking now. And seeking for the unity and all that, uh, praying towards that unity in myself, with my community, including my dead community, our spiritual forebears. That feels like a critical process. Where that leaves the Society of Friends, I don't know, but God is at work. And so that's the main thing.
Thank you, Brian. I think we're all so grateful. There are um, there are a number of comments on the sidebar that I would encourage everyone to read, though I wasn't able to read them out loud. Um, so many beautiful thoughts and gratitudes. I will read one. It says, "It's such a blessing to see the names and faces of so many dear friends. I feel a lot of joy and peace in my heart seeing you all this evening. Someone was talking to me today about, well, like most days, someone was talking to me about how hard it is to live a life in ministry. Um, And this evening reminds me, and I hope it reminds you, that we have each other, that love is our first motion, and that we are here in the spirit of love with each other, and we could see that. And there are so many times when we can see that. Um,
One of the, one of the marks that you're following a true leading, that you're being as faithful as it's given to you to be, uh, is that you feel the reward of joy.
mhm. Thank you, Brian. Um, I am going to put Brian's blog and email address in the chat again for those that came in after he was introduced. You are very welcome, according to Brian, to write to him at that address if you want to continue the conversation. He does have a new book coming out called The Gospel in the Anthropocene, Letters from a Quaker Naturalist at Barclay Press, and you can read more about that at his WordPress account. We have 1 minute left, and I am going to invite us into a little waiting worship, little mini waiting worship, and you can leave as you feel led. And Brian, if you don't mind staying back so we can just chat a little bit.
Okay.
Thanks.